is Peyton Grunzke. I am the former drum major of the Bluecoats. I was there in 2018 and 2019, and before that I was a drum major for River City Rhythm in 2017. I'm here today to share a little bit with you about the idea of cultivating a culture within your ensemble. This is something that I am passionate about because it has brought me and my ensembles so much success in my marching experience, or really any group that you're a part of. This doesn't have to just be about the marching arts. So I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about it and share some of these ideas because I've seen them work and make groups so much more successful and happy with each other. Before I start, I just wanted to note that I've synthesized a lot of these ideas from other speakers and people who have really inspired me, so I just wanted to give them credit. Todd Dufault, Betsy McCann, and Christina Lear are all people who I've heard speak on this issue, and their ideas have been really helpful to me. So I'm going to lay out, basically, eventually a process of how you can cultivate a culture within your ensemble, a specific culture that you dictate and decide. But first, you kind of have to know what a culture is. I took the Google definition. It's really broad. The customs, arts, social institutions, and achievements of a particular social group. So, customs, arts, social institutions, achievements, those are all some things that you can think about when you're trying to decide or define what the culture of your group is. I also have a list here of some other things that can be part of a group culture, but a good way to think about this for me that has been helpful is if you were to describe your ensemble and what it's like in a paper, what would you write down? What are the things that you would include? For example, there could be traditions that your group has, proud qualities. For example, Bluecoats, I think a proud quality of us is that we're really innovative. So innovation is like a quality that really speaks to our identity as a group. Etiquette, how do you rehearse? How do you interact with staff, with people at a parade, those types of things. What kind of relationships do you see in your ensemble? Do you feel like there's a lot of small, really tight-knit groups? Do you feel like everyone is very blended and bonds together with the whole rest of the ensemble? How is power handled within your group? Who has positions of power? What is their attitude towards holding power? Who makes decisions? What are some common behaviors or attitudes in your group? For example, it's a common behavior of most marching band groups that being early is on time and on time is late and yada yada yada. So if there's like something like that that's really specific to your ensemble, or not, just anything that really contributes to your overall identity. Also, what are some common solutions to problems that you may have? Is there a way that you handle things when they come up? Do you have a system that you use where you have to call a meeting of some group of people? Or do you junior tech? Do you allow people to give comments to those next to them on the field? Stuff like that. All of those can be a part of how you identify and define the culture of your group. It's kind of just like another word for the identity of your group. So, the first phase of this plan to cultivate a culture within your ensemble is to assess your culture, your current culture. So, kind of like I said, take a second and write down what you think, how you would define your ensemble culture. I think at this point in the process, it could be really important to include other people other than yourself in defining this culture because it's a collective idea. It's not just what it means to you, So it's important to think about everyone who is involved in your ensemble when you're trying to define the culture. And that goes into our next question. Who are the stakeholders? Stakeholders are anyone who has stake in what the outcome is of your ensemble. Anyone who is impacted by what your culture is or how it could change is considered a stakeholder. So you probably think of members and probably staff right away, but if you really want to take a broad view of stakeholders, consider the parents of the students in your ensemble. Consider your audiences. Consider your school community. You can be really broad with this, and I think it's actually better to be on the broader side than to be on the more narrow side. So really just think about who is a part of the culture, who influences the culture, and could be influenced by the culture. And then as you're assessing, it's important to be honest with where your ensemble is at and what the culture is really like, because a big part of this process is identifying any changes that you want to see in the culture. So if a really easy example, if you have a culture of junior teching on the field, which is where members give comments to other members rather than letting staff members give comments. Maybe that's something that is a really toxic part of your culture. It causes a lot of stress and disagreements and conflict, and maybe that's something that you want to see change. So be honest with yourself about that. For example, another example from my experience at Bluecoats, something that we really wanted to implement while I was there is being very detail oriented with such small things as our horn stacks or how we stack the props when we weren't using them. And so we kind of took that as like, it's not necessarily a weakness, but it's something that we want to see come through more in our culture. So after you've assessed and kind of defined what your culture is and what changes you want to make, then you have to make a plan for the sequence and just the general what changes, how you're going to make these changes happen. So you need to think tangibly, action-based, not necessarily attitude-based. It's going to be more effective if you come up with actions or systems that you want to implement that can then change people's attitudes or behavior. There's a quote that I just got an email from Gene Monsterelli. He's a big DCI drum major guy, and it says, make it easy for people to do the right thing. So any ways that you can make it easier for people to behave or have the attitude that you want in your culture, try to consider those. Those can be systematic. Like, it's going to work better if you say, we're going to start cows 5 minutes before rehearsal so people get here earlier, than if you just give a pep talk trying to encourage people to get here earlier. Like, the first one's probably going to have a lot more impact just because it's a lot more tangible and easy to hold people accountable to. And then specifically, as you're trying to make this plan, think about sequence, think about what comes first and what comes next. Maybe start small and make sure you can be consistent with that small thing before you try to do anything too big, right? And then make sure you're also considering who needs to be involved in these changes. If you're doing this process with your leadership team, you probably also need to consult your band director. If you have a problem with junior teching, you could ask your staff to help you call those people out on the fields. Consider anyone who needs to be involved in making these changes and what exactly the expectation is for them to make that happen. So after you've made your plan, now you get to implement your plan in phase 3. This is where you put your ideas into action. Just some notes on this process from my personal experience. You need to delegate. You cannot do everything yourself. You cannot do everything with 3 drum majors. I think one of the things that made our season so successful this past year at Bluecoats in 2019 was that our leadership team was fantastic. And I included them. I put a lot of work on them. I had high expectations for them, and I delegated responsibilities to them, and I trusted them that they would follow through, and they did. And it made everything so much more organized. We had shared respect for each other, so it wasn't like I was just making them do things. We all respect each other and work together as a leadership team. That's why we called ourselves a leadership team. And so for you, it's really important to share responsibility and delegate. Not only is it going to make it less stressful for you and less difficult for you to follow through on the things that you say you will do, but the more other people are involved, the more likely they are to buy into the end goal, which is another part here. As we move on to the next point, when you're thinking about your stakeholders, ensure that they feel valued. If they think that you're making these changes just for you and not because you care about them or the rest of the group, they're not going to want to participate in whatever changes you're trying to make. Encourage them that they are a valuable and important part of your ensemble, all of your stakeholders, if you're expecting them to participate in whatever changes are being made. Make sure that they trust you. And this kind of goes with the bullet below, follow through. The way that you build trust is you follow through on things that you say you're going to do, and you don't say you're going to do things that you don't follow through on. So if they don't trust you, they're probably not going to buy into any changes in culture that you want to see happen. So make sure you're just cultivating that trust before you try to make these changes. And then make sure that your stakeholders buy into the end goal. This just means that they kind of share this same vision for the future as you. And like I said, you can do this by involving them in the process of creating this goal, or if you're really good at selling things, like you can sell the goal in a way where they really want to buy in and participate in that. Whatever you need to do, try to get them to buy in. Follow through. First of all, it builds trust. Second of all, you're not going to see any changes in your culture if you don't do the things that you say you're going to do, and if you don't follow the plan that you made. And last point is to be prepared for chaos. When you make changes, things are going to change, obviously. Things are going to go crazy, and it might not happen the way that you expect. It might not, it might go totally whack for a minute and get crazy and then find an equilibrium, but the best thing that you can do is to be prepared for the unexpected, expect the unexpected, and just be ready for things to be crazy and have patience for that before you expect to see any actual outcomes. So, after you have implemented your plan, you've made some changes, you've waited to see the impact that they have on your culture, now it's time to reflect. Did the changes that occurred in my culture align with the changes that I hoped for? So ask yourself, be really honest. That's something that I added at the bottom to remember, is when you're asking yourself, did the changes that occurred, did they actually occur? And were they the things that you wanted to happen exactly? Because you can always tweak things or tweak plans to try to spin them more to be exactly what you wanted. Maybe you wanted them to go in this direction and the changes that you made kind of made it here, so you got to steer them a little bit. You can do that. You can change your plan. Ask yourself what went well and what went wrong after you've given things time to play out, after the chaos maybe has settled down a little bit, and who was involved in both the things that went well and went wrong. It's important to, place responsibility where it's due. So make sure you're taking note of who did great things, who did things poorly, and why, and if there was a way you could set them up for more success. So just as you're reflecting, kind of be specific and look at the details of that. I said at the bottom, remember to give changes their full measure, which means let things kind of play out before you try to make any snap judgments about them. Be honest as you're reflecting. Stay positive. It's okay. This is hard. It's not a surefire science way of making changes because you're working with people. It's not, just like rocks, and if you throw a rock, it's going to land right there. It's people react and act different ways, and there's so many different things going on in people's lives besides just band or whatever group it is that you're talking about. And have faith in your group members. You have to start by trusting them before they have any ability to prove you're right or wrong. If you don't give them any responsibility or trust them to do what you're asking them to do, then they don't have a chance. They won't even have the opportunity to prove that they can do it. Have faith in them until proven otherwise, while being realistic. So that is basically the overall process. After you reflect, you can kind of go back and tweak the plan or make a new plan and implement that and follow the same phases if you needed to. Change takes time. This is the second bullet on this slide. So don't be afraid to follow this cycle of reflecting and then planning and implementing and reflecting over and over many, many times. It might not even happen in one season. You need to give things time. As long as you're actively engaged in the process, it'll be okay. Going back to the first bullet point, be inclusive as much as possible. I kind of talked about this, but the more that you include people in the process, the more likely they are to be motivated to do the things that you want them to do because they buy into this end idea of a culture that you could have. So try to be as inclusive as possible. Limit exclusion. It's always a balance between being inclusive but being efficient and organized. So just find where that happy medium is for you and your ensemble. Relationships are the most important. When you die, the things that you're going to remember are the people that you met. When you age out of whatever drum corps or, graduate from high school, the most important thing is the relationships that you had with people and that your ensemble has together. So just keep that in mind and keep that as a priority when you're trying to think about what changes you want to make or how you are implementing these changes. Keep in mind that relationships and people feeling cared for and getting everything that they need at a basic level is the most important thing. On the other side of that, sometimes relationships require tough love. And it may take a little bit of saying no or putting your foot down in order to make changes happen. And you can do this in a loving and kind way. It's possible to be assertive without being mean or aggressive. So just think about that as you're implementing any changes. And also hold yourself accountable. You, as a drum major or a leader or whatever, are still very much a part of this ensemble that you're trying to cultivate a culture within. So make sure that you are behaving in the ways that you're expecting any member to behave. It's a fine line between your job being different because you're the drum major and you have these different responsibilities, and your job being different so you don't hold yourself to the same standard. You should be held to as high of a standard, if not higher, than any member of your ensemble. So keep that in mind. That is kind of all of my thoughts. It was a really quick presentation, and I could probably talk to you about your specific ensemble for days, but I hope that this is a helpful process for you. Like I said, I've experienced a lot of success with working on cultures in the groups that I've been a part of. And so hopefully you can experience the same success. I wish you luck and have a great season, whatever season you're preparing for.